Isla Winters had never been the kind of girl who lived on the edge. Never the type to leap before looking, never the woman who would end up in a stranger's bed after a few drinks, and certainly never the one whose life unraveled and rewrote itself in a single evening. But that night shattered every line she thought she'd drawn for herself. The day had been brutal. Her boss had fired her without so much as a thank you. Her roommate left behind nothing but rent unpaid and a hastily scribbled note, and her bank account balance hovered like a cruel joke beneath a grocery receipt. Her best friend, ever the firecracker, dared her to stop being so predictable, to do one thing, just one, that her cautious, always calculating self would call reckless. And somehow, that led Isla to a place she had never been before. A sleek, neon-lit downtown bar, the kind where laughter spilled like champagne and the scent of sin and second chances clung to the air. She wasn't even dressed like herself. No neutral cardigans or clean flats. She wore a silky red dress that hugged her in all the places she usually tried to hide. A dress that felt like rebellion stitched in satin. Like maybe, just maybe, she could be someone else for a night. And then she saw him, sitting alone nursing a whiskey, his eyes a piercing ice blue that held stories they weren't yet ready to tell. Hair dark as midnight and styled like he didn't care that it was perfect. He looked like trouble wrapped in charm, and she felt herself walking toward him before her brain had time to protest. He introduced himself as Noah, his voice deep and velvety, and she couldn't stop looking at the way his lips curled when he smiled like he knew something she didn't. Their conversation started light, weather, drinks, the absurdity of pineapple on pizza, but quickly dipped into deeper waters where they shared pieces of themselves they didn't even know were missing. He asked her what broke her heart, and she told him about her dreams shelved away after a life of playing it safe, about her art she hadn't touched in years, about her father walking out when she was 10. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer cliches. He just listened. She found herself laughing more than she had in months. Not the kind of laugh you fake for politeness, but the kind that bubbles up from the belly and makes your chest ache. One drink became two, then three, and somewhere between a slow dance in the corner of the bar and a whispered dare to keep the night going, she found herself stepping into the passenger seat of his sleek black car, the city lights blurring like stars caught in motion. They arrived at a penthouse she didn't even realize they were heading to, and if she was honest, she didn't care. There was something in his presence that felt oddly safe, like danger disguised as sanctuary. The apartment was all glass and skyline, minimalist and masculine, yet intimate, like him. The night didn't unravel into recklessness. Not exactly. It became a mosaic of moments she didn't want to forget. His fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face, her laughter echoing through a space too large for one man, the sound of jazz humming in the background, while they danced barefoot in the living room with two half-filled wine glasses forgotten on the floor. They talked until words faded into touches, until caution faded into connection, until she stopped counting the reasons why she shouldn't be there and started surrendering to the gravity pulling them closer. There was something so achingly real about the way he looked at her, as if he could see the bruises on her soul and loved them anyway. The night faded slowly, like a candle burning down to its base, and when sleep finally took her, it was wrapped in warm sheets, a softer heart, and a man she barely knew, but somehow trusted. When she opened her eyes to a soft amber dawn filtering through glass walls, she expected the sting of regret, the awkward dance of strangers trying to untangle from something that never should have happened. Instead, she found the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of quiet jazz still playing, and Noah in the kitchen, barefoot, handsome, humming under his breath as he flipped pancakes like it was the most natural thing in the world. He looked over his shoulder, smiled at her sleep-mussed hair and flushed cheeks, and simply said, "You like blueberries, right?" And in that moment, as she stood wrapped in a borrowed shirt and uncertainty, Isla felt something she hadn't in a long, long time. Not fear, not confusion, but the strange, sweet ache of something just beginning. Isla stood frozen for a moment longer than she meant to, clutching the oversized shirt around her, as if it could shield her from the unfamiliar intimacy of the moment. The smell of syrup in the air, the hum of jazz, The man who should have felt like a mistake, but instead felt like the first right thing in a long time. Her instinct screamed for an exit. Quietly, efficiently, no strings. She tiptoed across the cool marble floor, reaching for her heels near the couch, barely breathing. But before her fingers could graze the leather, Noah's voice floated in, teasing and smooth. "Leaving without breakfast? That's criminal." Her heart stuttered. She turned slowly, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her wary eyes. "I should go," she murmured, but he was already walking toward her with a plate in hand. Fluffy pancakes with a smiley face made of blueberries and syrup, his expression just as warm. "First offense. I'll let it slide if you sit and eat," he said. She should have left. She knew it, but her legs betrayed her, folding onto the bar stool as he poured orange juice, like this was something they did often. Between cautious bites, she caught him watching her, not with hunger or conquest, but quiet curiosity, as though memorizing her every blink, every breath. Their conversation began hesitantly, almost awkwardly, but quickly found its rhythm, like a song rediscovered. He asked her about her art, and when she admitted she hadn't painted in 2 years, his brows knitted with gentle disbelief. "That's a tragedy," he said softly. "The world needs more people who create instead of destroy." No one had ever said something like that to her, and it landed like a note she hadn't realized was missing from her life. She fired back questions too. Why he had so many books on astronomy, why there was a guitar collecting dust in the corner, what his tattoos meant. He answered some, dodged others, always with that mysterious smile. "Some things are better revealed slowly," he said. The space between them was charged, not just with physical attraction, but something deeper, like their souls were reaching across a distance neither of them understood. When she made a second attempt to leave, this time with shoes in hand and a joke about overstaying her welcome, he simply blocked the door with his frame, leaned casually and offered a second plate. "Second offense, punishable by extra syrup," he said, and her laugh betrayed her growing affection. They talked until noon crept into early afternoon, sunlight casting golden streaks across the floor like quiet blessings. She told him things she hadn't told her closest friends, about her father's abandonment, her fear of mediocrity, how she sometimes felt invisible. He didn't flinch, didn't rush to fix her. He just listened, really listened. And when the moment came to finally say goodbye, he walked her to the door and pulled her gently into a hug that lingered just a breath longer than necessary. She tilted her face up, intending to offer a casual thank you, but he kissed her instead, slow, meaningful, not rushed like the kind that forgets itself by morning, but the kind that imprints like a fingerprint on glass. When he pulled back, his voice was low. "No numbers, no pressure. If it's meant to be, we'll meet again." She nodded, pretending to be cool, but her heart beat like a trapped bird against her ribs. She walked out into the world that hadn't changed, but somehow she had. The next few days were a fog of questions and flashes, his smile in her memory, the way he said her name, the quiet ache in her chest she couldn't explain. She returned to the cafe where she worked part-time, scrubbing tables and pretending her heart wasn't on edge. She hadn't told anyone, not her friend who dared her, not even herself, really. She thought maybe that night would fade, become a wild story whispered in future conversations. Nothing more. Until the bell above the cafe door chimed on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and she looked up from the register, wiping her hands on her apron, only to see him standing there. Noah, drenched slightly from the rain, hair damp, suit impeccable, and eyes fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. He didn't smile right away. He just stood there watching her like he wasn't sure if she was real. And then, finally, his lips curved. "You forgot your second plate of pancakes," he said, and she swore the floor shifted beneath her feet. Not from fear, but from the undeniable truth that fate, it seemed, wasn't quite finished with them yet. The air in the cafe grew heavier the second Noah stepped through the door, rain misting off his sleek charcoal suit, his presence commanding in a way that didn't quite match the cozy aroma of espresso and vanilla beans. Ayla blinked, wondering for a second if her imagination had conjured him. But there he was, smiling like he'd never been gone, like 3 days hadn't felt like a quiet ache in her chest. Her hands fumbled with a coffee cup, nearly knocking it over as he approached the counter with casual grace. Black coffee, he said, as if they were strangers, as if he hadn't held her like she was fragile glass just nights ago. The smirk on his face, however, betrayed the game he was playing, letting her set the tone, letting her decide how this would go. Isla's manager noticed him too, instantly starstruck, practically stumbling as she offered complimentary muffins and asked if he was a model or perhaps someone important. Noah laughed politely, shook his head, and took a seat in the corner, his gaze never drifting from Isla, who now felt a strange flutter of anxiety and anticipation swirl inside her like a storm. She tried to focus, took orders, poured lattes, wiped down the counter, but every movement felt magnetized by his silent watching. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't possessive. It was curious, like he was trying to read the pages of a book only she could write. When her shift ended and she stepped out into the back alley to breathe, she found him leaning against the wall with two takeout cups in hand. "Didn't know if you liked your coffee sweet or bitter," he said, offering both. She took the sweeter one. He took a chance. "Dinner tonight?" His tone was light, but his eyes searched hers like the question mattered more than the words let on. Isla hesitated, heart pounding, wondering if this would blur the fragile lines they hadn't yet drawn. But something about him, his patience, his mystery, the fact that he came back, pushed her lips into a quiet yes. That evening, he picked her up in a black car that looked like it belonged in a Bond film. But the way he opened the door for her made her feel like the only woman in the world. The restaurant was intimate, tucked away in a brick-lined alley, lit by candles that flickered like secrets between them. He didn't rush conversation, didn't brag or boast. He asked about her art again, and this time, when she admitted she'd sold one painting years ago, he asked where it was now. She laughed, surprised he cared. But that's what made him different. He listened with intent, not politeness. Between sips of wine and bites of rosemary chicken, she noticed things. The subtle glint of his platinum watch, the effortless way he navigated the menu, the way the owner greeted him like an old friend. When he mentioned almost offhandedly that he'd be flying to Dubai the following week to finalize a merger, Isla's fork paused midair. A merger? Most tech guys she knew didn't speak like that. The puzzle pieces began to shift inside her. She looked at his jacket again, tailored perfectly, no label in sight but undeniably custom. The leather of his shoes, the simplicity of his confidence, the fact that he hadn't checked his phone once all evening, it all pointed to something far from ordinary. Yet he didn't flaunt it. He didn't try to impress her. He wasn't playing the rich man card. He was just Noah, but not just Noah. Isla felt the tug of curiosity growing sharper with every word he spoke, every laugh he shared. He told her he dropped out of college to build something that didn't exist yet, and though he didn't name the company, his voice held the kind of pride that's born from creation, not ego. She didn't press, not yet. Something in her knew that if she asked too soon, if she leaned too hard, the delicate fabric between them might tear. She wanted the truth, yes, but she also wanted to see who he was when he wasn't being defined by titles, wealth, or press releases. The night ended with a slow walk beneath the street lamps, the kind that glow golden and make silence feel like poetry. He didn't try to kiss her again. He just looked at her with that unreadable expression, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and whispered, "You make quiet feel loud." Isla stood there long after he drove away, her arms wrapped around herself, heart thudding not from confusion, but from the terrifying, thrilling realization that this man might be more than just a beautiful stranger. He was a story unfolding, and for once she wasn't afraid to read the next chapter. The days that followed were a haze of emotions Isla couldn't quite name. Long shifts at the cafe where the smell of coffee could no longer mask her restlessness. Late-night sketches she couldn't finish. Dreams that replayed candlelit glances and whispered phrases she pretended didn't matter. She hadn't seen Noah again in person since that soft, startling farewell on the sidewalk, but his presence lingered everywhere. In the unread messages she drafted, then deleted, in the way her heart leapt every time the cafe door chimed, in the way silence had started to feel like noise again. When he texted 3 days later, dinner at my place, homemade pasta, no pressure, she almost didn't reply. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pushed her to say yes. That evening, she arrived at his penthouse, feeling like a balloon floating too close to a flame. He greeted her in the doorway like nothing had changed, barefoot, apron dusted with flour, face soft with the same disarming charm that made her forget her fear the first time. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. Jazz played low in the background, and laughter came easier than she expected. Gentle teasing, clinking wine glasses, shared stories that danced between vulnerability and flirtation. For a moment it felt safe again, familiar, but that illusion shattered in seconds. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter just as she was twirling pasta on her fork, and without thinking, her eyes flicked to the screen. One line lit up like a slap. Board meeting rescheduled. Everhart Tech HQ. Her fork slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the porcelain plate as everything stilled. Everhart Tech. The name echoed in her memory like a headline. One of the biggest private tech empires on the East Coast. Billion-dollar valuations, anonymous CEO, low profile but brilliant. She blinked, pulse racing, mouth suddenly dry. "You're Noah Everhart?" she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. The room, once filled with warmth, turned heavy and cold. Noah didn't move. He didn't flinch. He only nodded, eyes filled with something between regret and resignation. Yes. One word. That's all it took to unravel every soft, tentative thread they had woven between them. Isla stepped back instinctively, heart slamming against her ribs as questions flooded her. "You told me you were just a tech guy." Her voice shook. "You let me think you were like us." His face tightened, not with arrogance but guilt. "I never wanted to be treated like a resume. I wanted to know how someone would see me. Not the title, not the money." Her spine stiffened. "So you lied?" "No," he said, softer now. "I didn't lie. I delayed the truth." She shook her head, more at herself than at him. The air between them was no longer light. It was thick with everything unsaid. How could she trust a man who hid something so massive? What else had he kept quiet? Her mind raced through every detail. His watch, the apartment, the effortless confidence. It all made sense now, and that terrified her more than anything. "You let me open up," she said, voice cracking. "You asked me everything, but you held the biggest part of yourself back." He stepped toward her, but she moved away, her arms wrapping around herself as if her skin didn't feel safe anymore. "Isla," he began, but her name sounded like an apology now. "I didn't know how to tell you without changing everything, and I didn't want to lose what we were building." She stared at the pasta cooling on the plate, the sauce smeared like a forgotten masterpiece. "Then maybe we weren't building anything real," she whispered. Silence followed, painful, pulsing silence. She picked up her purse slowly, each movement deliberate, a shield against the chaos inside. Her eyes met his one last time, searching for the stranger she thought she knew, the man who made pancakes and kissed her with restraint. But all she saw now was someone with too many secrets and too much power. "I need to think," she said, the words tasting like betrayal on her tongue. She turned and walked out, not waiting for the elevator, taking the stairs instead, down all 25 floors, one after the other, like peeling away layers of a dream that was never truly hers to begin with. Outside, the night felt colder than before, and as the wind tangled her hair and tears blurred the city lights, Isla wondered if the connection they shared had been real, or just another illusion carefully curated by a man who knew how to charm the world, but not how to be honest with the one woman who asked for nothing more than the truth. The wind had barely dried the tears on Isla's cheeks before the world came crashing in like a wave she didn't see coming. Within days, her face was everywhere, pixelated in tabloids, frozen mid-laugh in stolen paparazzi shots, dissected in online gossip threads filled with cruel words from strangers who knew nothing about her soul but everything about her neckline, her cafe job, her so-called Cinderella luck. She hadn't agreed to any of it. She hadn't prepared for a life that didn't allow for bad hair days or quiet moments in bookstores. It didn't matter what she wore or how she smiled. Every move became an invitation for judgment. Her privacy unraveled thread by thread, and the simplicity she'd clung to, the art, the quiet nights, the feeling of being seen just for who she was, now lay buried beneath headlines and hashtags. Noah tried to hold it together for both of them. He added extra security outside her apartment, whispered apologies between headlines, and told her more than once, "I didn't want this for you." But even he couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. He walked into her cafe one morning with 2 coffees and left with 3 photographers shouting her name as if it belonged to them. Still, he didn't flinch. At a gala dripping in gold and judgment, he stood tall beside her, fingers entwined with hers like a silent defiance. When the press circled like vultures, asking who she was and what gave her the right to stand beside a man of his caliber, Noah didn't blink. "She's my girlfriend," he said, voice sharp and sure, sending murmurs across the ballroom. The board disapproved. His PR team panicked. But Noah looked them in the eye and silenced the storm. "I fell for her before she knew who I was," he told the cameras. And it was meant to be romantic. It was romantic. But Isla felt the weight of every syllable land on her shoulders like invisible armor. Her life no longer belonged to her. Even their quiet dinners were tainted by whispers from neighboring tables, their walks interrupted by strangers asking for pictures or offering unsolicited advice. And though Noah's arms still felt like home, she found herself questioning if the price of their love was too high. One night, after dodging a headline that called her a nobody with good taste, she sat beside him on his balcony, city lights blinking like stars they couldn't touch. Her voice cracked under the pressure. "Are we too different to last?" She wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for honesty. Noah turned to her, eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. He didn't give her a grand speech. He didn't promise fairy tales. He simply reached for her hand and whispered, "I've never felt more like myself than when I'm with you. That's all that matters." And in that moment, beneath the harsh glare of public life, she saw it. What was real, what was rare, and what might just be worth fighting for, even under the spotlight. But love, no matter how genuine, isn't always enough when the world is clawing at its edges. And Isla soon learned that some storms don't come from the outside, they rise from within. The night after Noah's quiet declaration, she tried to believe him, tried to soak in the safety of his arms and the weight of those 5 small words. But fear crept in like smoke, slow, quiet, suffocating. The past, buried and bruised, came crashing back when her ex-boyfriend, the same one who once ghosted her during her darkest year, suddenly reappeared in her inbox with a smirk she couldn't see but could feel. He threatened to leak old private photos, nothing explicit, but enough to humiliate, enough to sell a scandal to the press hungry for more chaos. Her hands shook as she read his message, every syllable a stain. When she told Noah, he went pale, jaw tight with fury, already making calls to lawyers, his protection instincts on fire. But it didn't stop there. His corporate rivals, those who'd long waited for a weakness to exploit, latched onto Isla's vulnerability like vultures. Whisper campaigns began, questioning her motives, painting her as a social climber, a distraction, a threat to the Everhart legacy. Anonymous tipsters dug into her family, her schooling, even old tweets from high school, twisting harmless moments into damaging narratives. She tried to stay strong, but it felt like drowning in noise. Endless, ugly noise. Her family, never fully supportive of her relationship with Noah, seized the moment to voice their doubts louder. "This isn't love," her sister said over the phone. "This is survival dressed as romance." Her mother warned her she'd lose herself, that no ordinary girl walks into a billionaire's life without consequences. The final blow came during an argument, late at night, when Isla snapped under the weight of everything. "I'm not your charity case," she shouted, eyes wild with pain. "I don't want to be a story people pass around like a scandal." Noah, stunned but calm, stepped forward, cupped her tear-streaked face in his hands, and said with a quiet intensity that broke her, "You're not a headline, Isla. You're my heart." The words landed softly but deeply, carving into the silence between them like a promise. Yet even love like that couldn't mend her spiraling sense of self. She needed to breathe, to remember who she was before all of this, before the gala gowns and the interviews and the shadows of power. The next morning, while he slept, she packed a single bag. She didn't leave a note, only a key on the marble counter and a whispered goodbye against the door. She didn't run, but she walked away with trembling strength, knowing it wasn't the end, but a necessary pause. She moved into a tiny sublet across town, changed her number, and took a break from everything. No cameras, no cafe, no noise. She started painting again, not for commissions or attention, but for herself, pouring heartbreak and hope onto blank canvases until they bled meaning. It wasn't a breakup. It wasn't punishment. It was self-preservation, the kind of distance meant to heal rather than hurt. She still loved him, deeply, madly. But love, when tested by fire, either melts or forges into something unbreakable. And Isla didn't want to return to him as someone fractured. She wanted to come back whole. 3 months had passed like slow-burning seasons, and Isla had poured every shard of herself into colors, brushes, and canvases that spoke louder than her words ever could. Her fingers were often stained with paint, her soul still tender, but growing stronger with every sunrise she greeted alone. She no longer flinched at headlines or whispers. She had gone quiet, not out of defeat, but to reclaim her voice in a world that had tried to drown it. The apartment was small, but full of warmth. Sunlight through dusty windows, chipped mugs with steeped tea, unfinished art lined up like echoes of her heart's evolution. She didn't check social media, didn't ask about Noah, but some part of her, stubborn and sacred, held his memory like a pulse. On a rainy afternoon, under a gray sky that mirrored every emotion she'd tucked away, she stood outside a vacant brick building that had once been a bakery and now stood gutted, ready to be transformed. It was the same corner she had scribbled in her journal at 16, dreaming of an art gallery filled with underdog talent, with walls that celebrated pain and passion in equal measure. She stood in the drizzle, hood drawn, fingers tracing the for sale sign, and before she could blink the rain from her lashes, she heard his voice, software unmistakable. Isla. She turned slowly, unsure if it was the rain or her longing playing tricks. But there he was, Noah soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes more vulnerable than ever, holding a velvet box that didn't shine, didn't sparkle. It just waited. Her heart stopped. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He stepped toward her, not with the confidence of a billionaire, but with the humility of a man who had waited, hurt, hoped. I bought it, he said, glancing toward the building. The gallery, in your name. Not to impress you, not to win you, but because I believe in what you create. Because you once believed in me when I was just Noah. No titles, no suits. Isla's breath caught, eyes stinging with tears as the rain softened her lashes. He wasn't here with roses or security details. He was here with truth. I was scared, she whispered, the words trembling like her hands. I thought I'd lose myself in your world. I thought I wasn't enough. He nodded, stepping closer. So was I. I thought I'd fail you. That I wasn't allowed to be just a man in love without it becoming a circus. But I learned, love isn't about perfect timing. It's not about being fearless. It's about showing up, choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He reached into his pocket, the small box now damp but still cradled carefully, and with a breath that carried 3 months of ache and longing, he dropped to one knee, on the wet sidewalk, in the rain, in front of her dream. Marry me, Isla Winters, not because I'm a CEO, not because of the spotlight, but because I'm yours, always have been. Her vision blurred, but not from the storm, because her heart had found home again. All the pain, the distance, the fire they had walked through, it had led here. Not to a castle or a fairy tale, but to something real, raw, earned. Her hands flew to her mouth as her whole body trembled, not from cold but from everything breaking and mending all at once. Yes, she breathed, dropping to her knees in front of him. Yes, Noah. 1,000 times yes. They kissed with the rain pouring over them, their fingers tangled, two people who had unraveled only to find a deeper kind of love. Around them, the street blurred into background noise, because in that moment, under gray skies and over soaked dreams, a promise was made, not for perfection, but for forever.